For most of human history, war was brutal, obviously, but it was also surprisingly cheap. I don't mean morally, of course. I mean logistically. Kings didn't need spreadsheets, right? They just needed loyalty. But then, one single invention came along and changed everything. And I'm not just talking about the battlefield. See, gunpowder didn't just make war more destructive, it made it incredibly expensive. And by doing that, it basically forced the creation of the entire financial world we're all living in today. So, let's follow the money.
I mean, just look at how dramatic this shift was. On one side, you've got this kind of local seasonal affair, and on the other, a permanent industrial-scale enterprise. This wasn't just some tech upgrade. No way. This was a complete rewiring of the whole relationship between money, power, and violence. To really get a handle on it, we've got to look at that before picture first.
All right, so what did this world of cheap war actually look like? Well, it was a world where power was really spread out, and war, it had these natural built-in limits. So back in the day, your armies were mostly just farmers, right? They were called away from their fields for a fighting season, and then they had to go right back home for the harvest. Even the top guys, the knights, they were expected to bring their own gear. We're talking expensive armor, horses, the whole 9 yards. This whole setup had a natural off switch. I mean, if a campaign dragged on for too long, the army would literally just dissolve. Food would run out, and people had to get back to their farms. It's that simple. And what that meant was that power was spread out among a bunch of different lords, because no single ruler could possibly afford a massive permanent fighting force. The system itself kind of forced everyone to be restrained.
And then, gunpowder showed up. And it didn't just change the sounds and the sights of battle, it completely shattered the entire economic model of how you fight a war. Okay, this is the crucial point. We often think of gunpowder as the thing that made knights obsolete, and yeah, that's true. But its real world-changing impact, it was economic. It introduced costs on a scale that nobody had ever seen before. And in doing that, it basically killed the whole idea of a cheap, limited war.
So, the first huge expense was defense. All those stone walls that had protected towns for centuries, suddenly they were totally useless against cannon fire, just obliterated. To defend a city now, you needed these new, incredibly complex and expensive fortifications. They had to be thicker, lower to the ground, angled just right to deflect cannonballs. This took serious engineering, massive amounts of material, and a giant treasury. Your average local lord? No way they could afford it.
All right, the second major cost was offense. See, it took a lifetime to train a knight, but you could train a guy with a musket in just a few months. But here's the catch. The state had to pay for everything. The musket, the gunpowder, the uniform, and the big one, a year-round salary. This is what led to the birth of the standing army. Professional soldiers who were just a constant, massive drain on the treasury, even when there wasn't a war going on.
And this just perfectly sums up the new reality. Victory didn't go to the ruler with the bravest knights anymore. It went to the state that could afford to keep its armies paid, supplied, and equipped for the longest time. War became a battle of budgets. It wasn't just a military revolution, it was a financial one. And that created a whole new set of problems.
So if war is now permanently expensive, how in the world do you pay for it? Rulers couldn't just rely on loyalty anymore. They needed cold, hard cash, and a lot of it. And this necessity, it forced them to invent the core financial tools that make up the modern state.
The first really radical idea was to make taxation normal. Before this, taxes were for emergencies, right? But now they became a permanent, expected part of life. The whole relationship between you, the citizen, and the state, it changed forever. You didn't just owe loyalty anymore. You owed a predictable, constant stream of cash to fund the state's military machine. But, of course, there was a problem. The costs of this new kind of warfare were so huge, so relentless, that even permanent taxes just weren't enough. And if you raised taxes too high, you risked a revolt. So what's a state to do? You've got to find another source of funding.
And that led to the second great innovation, public debt. Suddenly, states started borrowing money on a massive scale. And this wasn't some desperate last-ditch effort. No, this was a deliberate core strategy. Credit literally became a weapon of war. A ruler who was good at securing loans could outlast an enemy, even if that enemy was richer. All of a sudden, bankers and financiers were just as important to the war effort as the generals on the battlefield.
So there you have it. Those three things, standing armies, permanent taxes, and public debt, those are the pillars of the modern centralized state. And get this, they weren't invented because of some grand political theory. They were just practical solutions to one single, massive problem:
Gunpowder made war way too expensive to fight the old-fashioned way. But even this new system had a flaw. And this brings us to the final, and honestly, probably the cleverest financial tool of them all. It's the hidden engine that made this whole expensive system work in the long run. And that is inflation.
So here's the trap that states were in. Tax too much and the people might revolt. Borrow too much and fail to pay it back. Well, you default and your credit is totally shot. They needed a quieter, kind of less obvious way to handle the crushing financial burden of being ready for war all the time. And here's how they pulled it off. A state borrows a huge amount of money to fund a war. Then, over the next few decades, it just lets prices rise, slowly and steadily. Now, the key here is that the real value of that old debt starts to shrink. The state still pays back the number it promised, but the money it's using to pay it back is worth less than the money it borrowed in the first place. What's really happening is that the cost of the war is being silently spread across the entire population through a gradual loss of their purchasing power. And this is a really key shift in thinking. Before, a ruler might clip coins or mess with the currency to solve some short-term crisis, a one-time event. But that was risky, and it was obvious. But the gunpowder economy, it created the need for a totally different kind of inflation. A slow, persistent, systemic inflation that was designed to manage the permanent costs of the state. It became a feature, not a bug.
Okay, so this is all really fascinating history, but you might be asking, why does this matter to me right now? Well, it's because the financial architecture that was built to pay for cannons and muskets hundreds of years ago, that is the exact same system we are living inside today.
I mean, just think about it. We have permanent, massive military budgets, even when we're not at war. We have a national debt that's just seen as a normal part of the economy. We have central banks whose whole job is to target a small, steady level of inflation every single year. And when we think about modern wars, they're not limited by manpower anymore, they're limited by budgets. None of this is new. These are all direct echoes of the gunpowder economy.
So the next time you hear politicians arguing about the debt ceiling, or military spending, or inflation targets, just remember this. You are listening to a conversation where all the rules were written centuries ago as a direct response to gunpowder. We are still living inside the financial system that was designed to make permanent, expensive warfare affordable for the state.
And that leaves us with a final, kind of provocative thought. Restraint, whether you're talking about a medieval king or a modern state, it rarely comes from morality. It comes from cost. And the whole point of the financial systems born from the gunpowder age was to disguise, defer, and spread out that cost. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, in a world that has perfected the art of paying for war, where does restraint even come from anymore?